KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger, a public affairs program featuring stories from all over the Central Valley with Sevag Tateosian, 90.7 KFSR.
I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Welcome to the beautiful Fresno State campus. We're in Studio A of the Mass Communication and Journalism Department, and our guest this week is a former teacher of mine, Ron Genini. Mr. Genini, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
For the record, no matter how old I get and how long it is I'm out of school, you're still Mr. Genini to me, not Ron, Mr. Genini.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, briefly, I'm almost 70. I'm from the Bay Area. I met my wife at the University of San Francisco. We agreed that whoever found a job first, the other one would relocate. She was from Fresno, so I came to Fresno in 1969. And I had a job at Parlier, which wasn't the best place to be then. I found a job at Central Union in those days, and I went there. I was the youngest one. I ended up being, seniority-wise, the oldest one. I lasted 34 years there. I had you. I had your brother.
Yes, you did.
I survived. You guys survived.
We did.
And I believe I had your sister-in-law too.
You did have a.
She was nice, but that's.
She was the nice one.
That's right. That's right. That's right. But anyway, I retired from Central in 2004. My wife and I have 3 grown married sons. We have 3 grandchildren, and I like to write and I like to travel. Retirement has given me the opportunity to do both, and I'm occasionally consulted by you.
Yes, you are. And for the record, I want to say that you're Central Valley Ledger's resident expert. That's what we're going to call you.
I like that. I like that.
You've been here to explain so many things in the past. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you today was because something's going on in Britain, and we need someone to tell us about that.
That's for sure.
So let's start.
That's something's going on, yes.
Let's start by talking about Great Britain, and what are we dealing with when we say Great Britain?
Okay. Great Britain is the island off the northwest coast of Europe. It consists of 3 countries, England, Wales, and Scotland. That is Great Britain. Great Britain and Northern Ireland are the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And Elizabeth II, their queen, has ruled for 64 years plus, longer than Queen Victoria. And the real authority, though, is the Prime Minister, who's the head of the winning party in Parliament. Party wins, the leader of the party becomes the Prime Minister. Party loses, he or she's out, and the other party's leader becomes the Prime Minister. The Queen actually has little to no power whatsoever.
Sounds more like symbolic.
Very symbolic, figurehead.
So do each one of those, are they countries, Scotland?
No, England and Wales are together. Whether the Welsh like it or not, England and Wales are one, okay? Scotland is a separate entity. They have what we would call home rule in Scotland. They have their own parliament, but they are part of the kingdom. They are part of it. And any election in Great Britain involves them. It also, interestingly, involves Gibraltar at the tip of Spain, the southern tip of Spain, because it is still British territory, though the Spanish don't care for that. But, oh well. That's what we're talking about.
So, and somewhere there's something called the European Union. What is the European Union?
The European Union is most of the European continent. It includes 28 sovereign nations. The idea started after World War II to try to combat the extreme nationalism that had caused such things as 2 world wars and others. Several treaties were signed starting in 1948. Then in 1957, there was a treaty signed that created what became the Common Market. 6 nations formed that. England, I'll rephrase that. Britain applied to join a couple of years later, but France, led by President Charles de Gaulle, would have none of it. He was not going to share status with another country. So England, Britain was kept out, and it was finally allowed to join, I think it was, yes, in 1973. Under certain circumstances, it came in. And I will be using England and Britain interchangeably, just like the press does.
Well, and so what is the benefit of joining or forming this EU? Do member states have to abide by certain rules?
Yes, they do. There are benefits, and of course there are drawbacks too. The benefits, common currency, where desirable, common standards of things, no borders, virtually no borders. You can go from France to Italy
Let me
whichever.
stop you there and just kind of dig in a little bit deeper there. So if I'm French,
okay,
born in Paris, let's say,
right,
I can travel easily to Germany and all the other
members,
and I could see the benefit and the negative of that.
Yeah, there are plenty of negatives with that. Something else that benefits a country, you're part of a bigger whole, and so you command more respect in the world. The Russians, the Americans, the others will treat a union with a bit more deference, a bit more respect, we hope, than they would individual nations. It's just like in business when you get a better price if you send a bigger lot than if you little pieces here and there. The laws they have to abide by, that was part of the problem. That was the main problem, I think, that got Britain out of it, and is causing a lot of movement in other nations in the European Union to want out. The governments of all those governments are committed to the Union, okay? But there are large groups of people in each of those countries who want to get out.
If I'm in the European Union, who is the decision-making entity? As, let's say I'm a farmer in France.
Good question.
Do I have a say, or who makes the decisions?
You're a farmer in America. Do you have a say? All right, this is the way it's structured. The capital is in Brussels. Belgians and Dutch make up the vast majority of the bureaucracy. There is representation from all the other countries in the bureaucracy, but the main ones are the Belgians and the Dutch. And not to put down any nation's history, but what are Belgium and the Netherlands' history in the last 100 or 200 years? Trying to fit in somewhere between Britain, France, and Germany. Trying to keep them, trying to accommodate them. That's where they are. They run the show, though. The parliament, which is made up of people elected by the voters in each of those countries, the parliament doesn't have really that much power. And as one person pointed out to me, there are more translators there than there are actually representatives. And this is how it is really strange. Imagine in the United States, if in each state we have Republicans and Democrats and other parties. If you totaled the number of representatives in each state legislature, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and then saw how many are Republicans, how many are Democrats, how many are this, how many are that, what's their percentage? Okay, well, for the European Parliament, that party has that percentage of members for the whole thing. You understand?
Yeah.
Okay, and so even parties that don't amount to very, very much really in their own home countries have probably a disproportionate number in the European Parliament. It doesn't make it, and the rule, it makes rules, but the real bosses are the bureaucrats. And these bureaucrats are what have stirred up a lot of resentment, because they're not elected, they're not responsible to anyone, and yet they sit there and they make their rules, and they make other people abide by them to a point. I mean, some of these are silly. There are some things that you have to have common standards for. But for example, like for condoms, one size fits all. Bananas to be laid out a certain way in the marketplace.
I'm going to stop you there because this is getting very, very interesting. So if I'm in the EU, the bananas in my store have to be laid out a certain way?
In a certain place, yes. Yeah, they're told they have to be here. These kind of bananas are acceptable. These aren't. You lay them out this way, okay? I mean, these are silly examples, but here you have it. And also in Britain, or for Britain, these Belgians or Dutch came up with a rule about their teacups. They can't make their teacups the way they always have because of some environmental issue that the bureaucrats have with that. I think this sort of topped it off. I think this probably topped off the resentment, as well as things such as national courts, Britain's courts or any other nation's courts are subservient to the, what is it called? It's the international, pardon me here, but the,
very interesting.
It's the international, the European Court of International Justice. There's the European Court of International Justice is what decides. Sure, in our country, we have the Supreme Court that can overrule the state of California or the state of Virginia or whatever, but we understand that we are actually a country.
Well, and can I ask you something that may be tough to answer for you, but I would love your opinion on it. Were they trying to create a more bigger one nation type of thing with the EU?
Yes, yes they were. And this was another problem that the British had. Margaret Thatcher was not a Eurocentrist. She was the Prime Minister of Britain for about 11 or 12 years until about 1990. And Margaret Thatcher was forced out by the other conservatives because she was not Eurocentric. And they were a certain branch in the Conservative Party wanted closer ties to Europe. The agreement that all these countries signed when they joined the EU is that they will strive for closer relations. They will strive for closer relations. Well, she didn't strive hard enough, and so other members of her party out her. And the people who came after her in the party were not, they weren't much. They weren't very, very strong.
Well, and why would, in your opinion, why would then Mr. Cameron resign? I mean, you know, if the people said they want out of the EU, then you had a resignation by Mr. Cameron. I mean, what would be the reason of that?
Well, Cameron, 7 or 8 years ago, promised that he would bring peace to the Conservative Party by this yes-no election. By golly, he was going to campaign for it. He put himself on it. And he was sure that it would pass. He was negotiating with the EU, said that he had gotten some benefits for Britain. For example, like being able to control the migration, getting better trade advantages, or at least more respect for British sensibilities in their marketplace, etc., like the teacups, things like that. He put his reputation on it. And hey, baby, like I say, he lost. You go.
But as we hear in the news,
yeah,
that there are refugees leaving the Middle East, does this tie into when they say they're traveling through such and such country to get to Germany?
For welfare.
Well, and does it have to do with the EU and the lax rules, you think? Interesting.
Yes, it does. And the British saw that, and they want no part of it. They want no part of it. This uncontrolled migration. Migrants who can help an economy, that's one thing, but this is just uncontrolled migration. And this caused a lot of fear, some justified, some not, but they want to keep their country.
And I hear sometimes it mentioned that the same movement that's happening in Britain with the exit from the European Union is kind of what we're seeing in the United States with the backers of Donald Trump. Now, not favoring one side or the other, what is your opinion on that?
Oh, I've heard the same thing, of course. The relationship is superficial between the two. Yeah, in both, there's a great concern about uncontrolled migration, a great concern about trade inequalities, great concern about jobs going out. Well, in our country, jobs going out. In Britain, it wasn't. But Trump appeals to a populist group. He himself really isn't a populist. I mean, you can't say that a man who's a flamboyant developer is a populist, but he appeals to them. He says what too many other politicians may have thought but were afraid to say. And that's where they probably draw the connection here. That is this anger at losing their nation. Many Americans feel we're losing the nation to this uncontrolled migration. The British and other Europeans felt the same way about this uncontrolled migration from the Middle East. And that's where you have the similarities. Also, resentment against the kind of government, well, our government seems to be rather unresponsive. And contempt for patriotism seems to be in vogue in many areas, including official areas. These things people in Britain and in the other countries see, and they resent it.
And, you know, with 4th of July that just passed,
yeah,
tell us about the relationship between the American Revolution and what we're seeing with the exit of the euro from Great Britain.
Okay. What was the American Revolution based on? A disrespect of the colonists' rights. There it was. The British government just did not respect the rights of their colonists. And the colonists revolted, okay? Otherwise, if they had respected the rights of the colonists, there wouldn't have been Americans, they still would have been British, all right? What do you have in the EU? What appears to be disrespect for the people and the countries, the traditions and what have you in those countries, and get the same result. It's not so much that Britain is out of the EU. There are 2 years to decide what's really going to happen. These divorces aren't instantaneous Reno kind of divorces. These have to take 2 years. This will be negotiation. At the end of that negotiation period, Britain might very well leave. It might very well not.
So it can come back.
It can come back. It can come back. But right now, it's not. Right now, it's estranged. Well, I'm putting it in terms of a divorce, for example. But it's not that there's bad feeling, except by some leaders. But it's not living in the same house anymore. It might come back, you know, if there's a reconciliation or not, but the divorce isn't final.
There are some people who think that with the exit of Great Britain, you might have other similar countries vote to exit. What are your thoughts on that, and is that a fear?
It's a very real fear of the leadership of the EU, because as I said before, the governments are committed. But the people in those countries don't necessarily feel committed. I know in northern Italy, there's a strong movement to break off In fact, even just secede from Italy and make it, the northern league, okay? Let the southern Italians, float. In France, you have a well, it's not neo-Nazi, but it's certainly far right wing in France. Also, get it out of it, In Germany, same sort of thing. In Germany, the same sort of thing is happening. You have people there who really don't like Angela Merkel's open invitation to the Middle East and North Africa.
And here we are at Fresno State on the campus in Studio A of the Mass Communication Journalism Department. By the way, I have to say that the students running this program are doing an excellent job. Why should we care about what's going on in Great Britain? I mean, after this interview, I'm going to get in my car, go home, see my family. Why would it even bother me what's going on in Europe?
A good question. I wonder why. Well, because with investments, with communications, with personal relations, nowadays you have to think locally and globally. Once upon a time, local was all there was. You didn't care what happened because it didn't mean a damn thing. But now it does. Now it does. What happens there can ripple elsewhere. The shaking up of the stock markets is something that affects everybody. But that's only for people who panic. People who panic, well, people panic. I think a lot of this is caused by money changers and other traders who are running neurotically around, but I don't think in the long run it's going to have much effect. But people will feel affected. They feel affected. The news makes people feel affected. You don't hear what happens in the middle of Paraguay, perhaps, or in Nepal or someplace like that, but because it's not going to affect you. But if something happened there, and it was built up in the world's press as major importance, we'd be affected. Do you understand me?
I understand exactly what you're saying.
So that's where it's coming from. But yeah, we have ties. We have ties to Europe, and those ties are affected by this sort of thing. People who travel now may have to get a different kind of visa on their passport. I don't know. Things are going to be different. Maybe. I say are, but I also say maybe.
If other countries get out, then will we feel a difference? I mean, I guess the better question to ask you is, at what point should we in Fresno, California, be worried about this? And that's a tough one.
That is a very tough one. I wasn't prepared for that one. I'll have to admit, but let me see here. Well, it could affect the cost of something you buy. It could affect the cost of it. That's what I say.
We are running out of time this week, Mr. Genini, on the program, and I think you've done a great job in explaining what's going on to a lot of people who I think were confused about this, because a lot of people were asking me, what does this mean? Did you have similar conversations with folks?
Sure I did. And with family, etc. But again, where I think it affects us is it could affect the price of something you buy. It could affect travel plans. It could affect a number of things like that.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is your book. Now, shifting gears as we count down the time. As we count down the time of the program. Your book, what is it about? When can we expect it out?
Good question. All right. As you indicated, I taught at Central for a long time. And many of those years, at least 25 of them, were spent teaching California history. I gathered material, and more material to fill up a whole and some file cabinet of clippings and things like that, of everything I found concerning the state's history. And this is what I base my lectures on and so forth. And so I had written a number of articles over the years, published many, many articles in professional journals like American Heritage, The Californians, and what have you, Journal of the West, and some others. I had written 3 other books that were biographies of Californians. I wanted to create a major opus, and so I wanted to put all of this together, you know, put all my lectures together, put all of my stuff together, not just my notes, but all of my clippings and what I knew, my own knowledge, my own life experiences here. My family, I'm a second-generation Californian. My parents were born here early in the 20th century. There weren't, when I was a kid, there weren't too many of us that were native Californians and children of native Californians. But I wanted to put all this together, one big opus. I started it. I got sick. I had to have surgery because of the medicines I was taking and because of the pain I was enduring before. I wasn't able to continue. I just couldn't continue it. I found a marvelous surgeon here in Fresno, Dr. Robert Ryan, neurologist, neurosurgeon. And he performed a wonderful surgery on me that after I went off the medications, I was able to get back to work, and I completed it. 850 pages.
That's incredible, and we look forward to when it comes out. Would love to have you back to explain that.
It should be at the end of this year or beginning of next.
Mr. Genini, I can go on talking to you about all kinds of things, but we are out of time this week. Thank you so much for making the trek to California State University, Fresno, where we're located.
Thank you for inviting me.
And you're always welcome on the program.
Thank you, sir. That's
all for this edition of the Central Valley Ledger from Studio A on the campus of California State University, Fresno. Want to also mention that we couldn't do this program without the Mass Communication and Journalism Department students who are behind cameras and in the studio making us look and sound good, which I'm sure Mr. Genini appreciates. Thank you to our audience members listening to us on 90.7 FM KFSR Fresno, and to those watching this broadcast on Comcast 93 and AT&T 99, the CMAC channels. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Tune in next week to a new edition.
KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger every Sunday morning at 11:30. For a complete program schedule, visit kfsr.org.